So obviously, a lot of cats are going to be thrown off by the title, the thumbnail, because what? Wait a minute, time out. Scratch my chinny chin chin. Luffy is overpowered? How can that be? When someone like Yonko Kaido can speed blitz Luffy into oblivion, one-shotting him, and in the anime, Luffy does pretty much every attack that he has in Gear 4 Bowman, including the King Kong gun, and the man Kaido was clean. There wasn't a single scratch on his pectorals. Then you have Big Mom. In the manga, she blocks the Kong gun with relative ease. In the anime, it's the Kong gun and the Leo Bazooka. She just smacks that away, lightweight. And Big Mom, she's a big woman, so you need a lot of weight to push around a big woman like that. That's for goddamn sure. I know. I'm not necessarily proud, but I know. Okay? When I was younger, no more! You have guys like Shanks, who I think is the strongest guy in the world. You have Mihawk. You have guys like Dragon, who a lot of folks put as the #1 guy in the world. You have potentially Emu and Blackbeard. The list goes on and on and on. In fact, at this point in time, if it's Luffy versus an Admiral, like Kizaru or Fujitora or Green Bull, I'm putting my money on the Admiral. Even though we haven't seen what Green Bull can do at all, I'm still putting my money on Green Bull. After Wano, maybe. You have to wait and see what Luffy can do. But until then, I'm still saying the Admirals are over Monkey D. Luffy. How is then Luffy overpowered when there are so many people that can beat Luffy in the world of One Piece? Well, when you look at the future, Luffy is bound to be one of the strongest, if not the strongest person in the world. This harkens back to Don Chinjao's statements of Luffy has to surpass the Admirals, the Yonko, and eventually Gold D. Roger himself. This is, in Don Chinjao's words, inevitable. In order to be the Pirate King and to find the One Piece and so on and so forth, he must surpass these powerful people and these legends. Maybe Emu will be like, let's say, the Kaguya-like figure for One Piece, and Emu's just disgustingly powerful. Maybe Blackbeard's still going wild and going crazy by then, but Luffy will be among the top coming in the story, I guarantee you that. But in order to fully grasp as to why Luffy is overpowered, we have to first go back to the pre-time skip, because then this kind of gives us a nice segue into how Luffy is now, today, and what has changed so much, power-wise. When they were going up to Skypiea, and by the way, if you skip Skypiea, shame. Take your One Piece fan card and throw that into the goddamn trash from the toilet, because you don't deserve to be a One Piece fan if you skipped Skypiea. And my boy, Lightning God in hell. But that being said, okay, now we've weeded out the non-One Piece fans.
We're on a baby hunt. I don't think we don't know how to weed them out.
When they were going up to Skypiea and they arrived at the White Sea, they're having a good time, they were chilling. Usopp almost killed himself because he wanted to dive to the clouds, and then Rob and then Luffy have to save him. It's a good time, despite that near-death experience for Usopp. But when they arrive there, they encounter, for the first time, Wiper. And Wiper beats down Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro in one go. And they are ultimately saved by Gonfall, who comes in there. But this shocks Nami entirely. What the hell just happened? How does Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy get beat down by this one dude? We see that the environment, because they're so high up, the air is very thin, so they couldn't use their abilities as they wanted to. Obviously, they adapted to that environment and they had their fight, and things progressed as they would. But what we saw at the beginning kind of showcases how the crew dynamic is structured, to where, in a general sense, there's like 3 major tiers. You have the weak trio, which consists of Nami, Chopper, and Usopp. You have the middle trio, which consists of Brook, Frankie, and Robin, and then you have the top trio, the monster trio. You have Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy. The way it works, essentially, is that Luffy wasn't too far ahead combat-wise of Sanji and Zoro. He was still further than them, but he wasn't tremendously further than them. So in case in point, when you look at how their 3v3s played out, meaning it's the 3 strongest of one group versus the monster trio, Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy, And this only happens really 3 times in the entire story. Happens in Alabasta, happens in All Along Park, and it happens in Enies Lobby. And among those 3 times, we see the structure where Luffy fights the main bad guy. He fights the raid boss, the final villain. And he has a knockdown, drag out fight. Like, he loses a few times maybe. It's bloody. It's extremely bloody. He's exhausted. He can barely move. The list goes on and on and on. Like, this was a tremendously difficult fight for Luffy. When it comes to Zoro, he has these difficult fights as well, but they're not nearly as difficult as, let's say, Luffy's fights, where Luffy actually lost to Crocodile twice. Whereas when it came to Mr. 1, it was a drag down, knockout fight, but Zoro still got the job done anyway, and he wound up beating Mr. 1 by learning the Shishi Son. And then on top of that, you look at, let's say, Kaku. Compare Kaku and Zoro to Lucci and Luffy. It's like, like Kaku, he was tough. He was doing rock hugger off the ceiling, doing weird Q moves. Like, it was weird. It was kind of cool too. And Kaku didn't know like what exactly he was doing, but it was still cool nonetheless. But Luffy had a war on his hands when it came to Lucci. So Zoro has an easier time to deal with Kaku and Mr. 1 arguably than Luffy did with Crocodile or Rob Lucci. And then look at Sanji's fights. Sanji tends to be relatively okay after finding the 3rd strongest guy compared to those 2. So against Mr. 2, he only had a few broken or fractured ribs and just walked away. And then when it came to Jabra, that was hard for him than, let's say, Mr. 2, but at the same time, that's on the heels of fighting Caulifla. So he came into that fight against Jabra already damaged. And even still, he had an easier time handling Jabra than Zoro had Kaku, and the Doriki between Kaku and Jabra was only like a 20 Doriki difference. But then on top of that, the Delphi ability that Jabra had was far more refined because Kaku didn't know what the hell he was doing half the time. Like, literally, Kaku would make up techniques on the fly. And on top of that, Kaku was a herbivore Zoan, a giraffe, while Jabra was a carnivore Zoan, a wolf. And from a combat standpoint, the carnivorous Zoans have an edge over the herbivore Zoans. So Jabra was way more fine as a fighter, arguably, than Kaku was. I would argue that easily. And the only exception to this is All Along Park. When All Along Park, Zoro fights the 3rd strongest guy in Hachi, and Sanji fights the 2nd strongest guy in Kurobi. So there's only one exception to that rule, and that, for the most part, is how that system is structured, where Sanji, Zoro, and Luffy, because of how they handle the top 3 guys in the opposing forces and how those outcomes play out, it's very obvious to me that back in the day, Luffy, Sanji, and Zoro were actually in the same tier. They were within the same scope of power, but of course you give the edge to Luffy. And then outside of the monster trio, the next immediate combat peers that he has are the supernova. The supernova are essentially a group of Luffy's rivals, if you would. And among those supernova, 2 stand out to be like Luffy's main rivals, if you would, back in the pre-time skip. Eustace Kid and Trafalgar Law. Those 2 obviously stood out among the rest of the pack. And the thing about Kid is that back in the day, Kid, a lot of folks believe that he was stronger than Luffy, but in my mind, Shaki's statements about Kid doing atrocities against civilians kind of throws out of the water where, okay, Kid's bounty is higher than Luffy's, mainly because he actually commits crimes against civilians. Like, he does the raping and the pillaging and so on and so forth. So from that standpoint, Luffy's main peers from the pre-time skip, from a combat standpoint, have been his crewmates of Sanji and Zoro, and have been the supernova, in particular, Law and Kid. Now, in the post-time skip, this is where things take a dramatic turn. And not the beginning, because in the beginning, you can't necessarily say that's changed, the system, the actual peer group, where they're kind of all in the same tier, if you would. Because Luffy fights against Horty Jones, fine, it is what is there. Zoro beats him beforehand, and then later on fights against Hyuzo, whereas Sanji and Jinbei team up to take on Waratsume. And by the way, Jinbei is also someone that you could say was at the beginning in Luffy's peer group because Jinbei and Luffy did fight. And Jinbei did actually insult Luffy on his training for the past 2 years. But of course, Luffy had a lot more to show, obviously. I'm just saying that at the beginning of the post-time skip, you could say that Jinbei is also thrown into that mix as well in Luffy's peer group, in Luffy's tier. Next, you have Punk Hazard. And in Punk Hazard, things are kind of wonky because Zoro fights against Monet, but she's the secretary of Caesar Clown and ultimately is not that big of a threat. Sanji's only fight is against Virgo, but Sanji can barely move at that time. And Virgo is clearly, by far and away, the strongest person in Punk Hazard who's an adversary. And then Caesar Clown winds up being like everybody at one point in time, which was ridiculous because Luffy was messing around having a good old time, like, yay, Atakano, Yume wa, Kaguyazume. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like Zoro has to actually yell at Luffy, like, Luffy, what the hell are you doing, dog? Like, we're in the new world. Stop messing around. And then immediately afterwards, Gum Gum No, UFO, woohoo! It's like, okay, dog, all right. And then the strongest guy on the island, who is at the time Virgo, is defeated by Law, ultimately speaking, in that crazy multi-mountain range cut. But now in comes Dressrosa. Dressrosa changed the game immediately. Why? Because again, in Punk Hazard and in Fishman Island, you cannot say definitively that Luffy is completely separated from his peer group when it comes to combat. In Dressrosa, Luffy unveils Gear 4 Bound Man. And before that, it's very important to note that pretty much everybody that went up against Doflamingo, including Luffy himself in non-Gear 4, were getting thrashed. Sanji got thrashed. Law got thrashed several times. And Law actually knew what his powers were. Luffy without Gear 4 also got thrashed. Doflamingo was thrashing everybody. And yes, Law and Luffy did team up and the Gamma Knife happened and it was crazy, but Doflamingo was still whooping booty. It was stupid, man. Like, Doflamingo has a lot of fanboys, rightfully so, right? Like, for real. The man is flamboyant as all hell, too confident with a pink feather jacket, but it works. It works for the man. God damn. My goodness. Doflamingo was truly impressive. You had the combination of Luffy and Law, and they still couldn't get the job done until Gear 4 Bowman. And that's where everything really does change. Again, Law already got thrashed several times by Dofi. And Dofi, even though he had organ damage, he was still a beast. But when Luffy unveils Bowman, he's beyond Dofi. He jumps from being weaker than Dofi in Gear 3 and in Gear 2, and then completely blows him out of the water in Gear 4. To the point where even Dofi uses Awakening, and even still, Luffy is destroying this man, son. It is ridiculous how powerful Gear 4 is compared to his previous states. It is ridiculous. And the only drawback is that, and it's still a big drawback, obviously, so it's a tremendous drawback, but the drawback ultimately is he can't maintain Gear 4 for a long period of time. And after it's done, his haki depletes, which is obviously an issue. This then puts Luffy on an entirely different tier compared to his peer group, including Kid at the time. Because afterwards, we find out from Brûlé and Whole Cake Island that Kid wasn't doing so hot when it came to the new world. Now, we find out later on that was pretty much a lie. But at the time, Uro was getting the hype, but that's a whole other matter. Luffy unveils Bowman, and it is tremendous. And Luffy now has to jump a tier, while the other characters, you cannot say that they have jumped tiers. You can't say for Kid, you can't say for Law, you can't say for Zoro or for Sanji. It is what is there. Now there is a caveat, obviously, that at that point in time, Zoro must have had, or at least we're going to assume that he has Ashura, but he hasn't used it since the pre-time skip, obviously. And Sanji on Fishman Island did show a final form or final attack state, if you would, in Hell's Memories, which you can say is his Ashura equivalent of sorts. But the difference between Zoro and Sanji when it comes to Ashura and Hell's Memories is essentially these are just instantaneous forms that they use to use their final attack. So Zoro has never used Ashura for more than a few seconds, and that applies to Sanji as well for Hell's Memories. But in the case of Luffy, Luffy actually has a full-blown transformable state that he can use for like 30, 40, 50 minutes and just unleash maximum devastation. And then you get Whole Cake Island, where you have Luffy versus Katakuri. And Luffy essentially is training to get even stronger. So mind you, again, we cannot say that, essentially speaking, Zoro, Law, Sanji haven't shown themselves to get stronger for the time skip as a whole, where Luffy has. That is essentially what it breaks down to. Luffy has shown himself not only in Bound Man, but also unveiled Snake Man, and then is also training his observation haki during that fight. So he gets even more stronger, then he jumps another tier. And then now finally in Wano Country, we're seeing power-ups for Zoro and Sanji, but even still, Luffy is training. Now, a lot of folks say that Kid is on the same level as Luffy. I disagree. I don't think so. The training that Luffy went through has to be valued. I don't see why it wouldn't be. And just to be clear, the training is the training over the time skip. Yes, your haki can bloom, but haki is only one power pool. Duff Fruits do matter as well. I mean, case in point, we just saw recently in the chapters how the barrier fruit can even block Shaden wielding Enma, and we also know that it can actually block the King Punch, so that ability does matter as well. Powers and abilities do matter. For someone like Law, that power does greatly, tremendously matter. So even though his hockey game may not be all that good, his Duff Fruit game is off the goddamn charts. That matters. So haki blooming isn't gonna be enough, and I'd argue that we're gonna see it for sure, where yeah, base Kid and base Luffy, they do have similarities in like how they eat the dango and the prisons, and how they carry on the blocks and their strength, but Kid has to show something on the same level as a Gear 4 Bound Man Luffy. And mind you, Luffy is again already getting stronger. Now his armored haki is leveling up, and according to Hyogoro, he bypassed the whole barrier aspect and went into the barrier going into an object and actually doing internal damage, which is why the cuffs came off when he was in immediate danger during the prisoner mine situation. Luffy, in conclusion, is absolutely overpowered, in my personal opinion, compared to the rest of his peers. His peers will ultimately grow over the course of time, absolutely, but Luffy grows at an exponential rate compared to his peers, compared to, I would argue, Kid, compared to Law, compared to Zoro, compared to Sanji, compared to, let's say, I don't know, Hawkins and Drake. He grows exponentially. Not only is it in combat, but also it's in portrayal as well. Because portrayal-wise, Luffy's bounty is 1.5 bill. Kid's bounty, I think, is like still 400 or like 500 something. Kid's bounty is still 500 million. Zoro's bounty is still 320, Sanji's 330. Luffy blows out the rest of his peers, not only in combat, but also in portrayal, to where Luffy, you could argue easily, is at least a tier ahead of the rest of them, with the exception of maybe Kid. Maybe. I would argue probably 2 tiers. I would honestly argue he's probably 2 tiers above the rest of them. That's how powerful Luffy is. So, to wrap this up, Oda clearly is giving Sanji the Raid Suit and Zoro Enma, and then probably, hopefully later on, the Nikatetsu, as a way for the monster trio in the crew to catch up to Luffy. Jinbei, I'm not too sure about the situation. Honestly, I'm really not. I think Jinbei may either pass away at some point and not necessarily get stronger, because I think Big Mom did something severe to Jinbei. That's my guess. Hence the reason why we're in Act 3 of Wano right now, and we haven't seen Jinbei at all. And then there's also the chance that Law may die as well. But the main thing here, let's say, would be Kid. Because Oda did have plans for Kid, but at the same time, according to Oda, he wants to end the story in 5 years. So if Wano kind of runs like Dressrosa in terms of, let's say, Luffy and Kid, to where it's like more so Luffy and Law, where Kid, he's damn good, but he doesn't have that Gear 4 Bound Man equivalent, whatever it is that Kid has going on. And if his bounty doesn't raise as high as Luffy's come the end of Wano either, then Kid's out of the picture. Meaning, when it comes to like the tier group, Luffy is definitely a tier, at the bare minimum, a tier above Kid at that point in time. But we'll find out later on in the arc, obviously. Luffy, yes, he is overpowered. Because eventually, we all know that the folks that we see currently, the Young Bucks, Sanji, Zoro, Luffy, Law, Kid, they stay alive, they will ultimately be the new faces, the new top of the One Piece world eventually. But because Luffy's growth is so exponential, because he grows at twice the rate as the other people do, even among these powerful monsters, is a monster. But that's it. This is my take on Luffy being overpowered. I think he definitely is. Oda's trying to catch up, but he's not going to give Sanji or Zoro like some crazy haki montage thing. Or haki may bloom in these fights, fair enough, fine. But Luffy's actually leveled up his armor haki, and he skipped a step. Like, goddamn. So, it's too much. But at the same time, if he wants to be someone like Blackbeard, and Blackbeard may have 3 devil fruits, maybe, and then also haki as well, it's like, ooh, yeah, I mean, if Blackbeard's that broken, or if Emu is, let's say, tremendously broken, Luffy has to be broken as all hell too. Alright, that's it. I'm gonna catch you guys and gals later. Let me know your stance on the subject matter at hand. Be sure to rate the video. It is not that hard to do. I guarantee you that, because I know that you all have a device called ZMouseSue. You use ZMouseSue to click, rate the video, to click, subscribe, to click on that bell to join the squad. And of course, as always, feel free to please do comment in the comment section down below. Peace. And have a nice goddamn day.